welcome. So, today I have Victor on with me. Now, if you're listening on the podcast, yesterday I recorded a podcast about how we're living in survival mode all the time, and it's really hard to get into creation mode, but that's where like the magic happens in your life. And so on the podcast, if you're watching this on YouTube, you might want to go back and watch podcast. I think it was episode 27 where I talked about this. And so today we thought we'd share this because, on YouTube, we've been trying to show up every so often. We haven't been so good about it lately because we've been busy.
Well, I'm growing so many different platforms individually, each of the kids and even yourself. And, on our YouTube, the branding is everyone looks up RV travel, RV this, RV that. And so in some part you feel like, how is that aligned with the mindset? And it's for us, it's like, obviously makes sense. But based on views, sometimes we don't get that feedback, right?
Yeah, definitely. It seems like one and the same. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what that survival mode was like firsthand, because Victor is the expert of living in survival mode for a long time. No, you were the expert? Not anymore. You're not the expert.
No, it's a constant struggle, and some of that has to do with natural wiring, and some of it has to do with trauma in your youth, and some of it has to do with keeping yourself in that thing, and so actually having, my personality type naturally wants to help, but it also keeps you from experiencing your own desires, wishes, dreams, things like that. And we want to just bring awareness so that you go, hey, if you know all this is happening and still make the choice, more power to you. But ultimately what we're trying to do is empower you so that you have a choice and you live your life. So you're not, and those last few breaths, you know that you lived your life exactly how you wanted on your terms. And again, we're not sitting here saying that we have it all figured out, but I really do think everyone deserves health, wealth, and abundance. So it's not something that's for the privilege. Right? We've traveled all over the world, and people just make these assumptions that it must be so nice to be independently wealthy. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means.
We've zeroed out our accounts many times.
And the fear associated with doing that, especially for me, is paralyzing. Because of, again, some of my wiring. But we faced that a little bit. And, we're going to get into that, my adrenal fatigue. And that was kind of a big moment, I would say, for both of us, really, right? Because you were already kind of questioning a lot, but at the same time, it even more got you to go, what the heck are we doing?
I would definitely say it had an effect on both of us. For me, it had an effect more on that I had so much wrapped up into my identity as being a wife and a mom that after we went through all of that, then I became so much more of an individual. Like, what does Robyn want to do? Where do I feel good? Before, I used to just be that person who was like, well, my kids are doing this, and I'm Victor's wife, and I'm making sure he has dinner every night. And I had so much tied up in like approval from those things that I never even, at that time, before then, I didn't do anything on my own.
Yeah, I mean, just a little backstory on that. In my mid-30s, I went through a bad bout of adrenal fatigue. And, to this day, if you go to a doctor, probably 50-50 actually would tell you that's actually a thing. And actually, I posted a couple of things on social media, and I get all this, hey, this doesn't exist, this guy's a clown. It absolutely exists. If you don't believe me, go to a naturopath, Google the subject, and you're going to get conflicting. Now, whether you identify that as the adrenals getting fatigued, that's completely different. The idea is that we put those two words together in the description so you have an understanding of what's associated with your fatigue, whether that's associated with not being able to create the hormones you need because of other hormones inputting it and affecting the sites and where you're absorbing it. That is, to me, less important than the idea that modern society creates a massive amount of burdens. And when you couple that with bad food, pollution, and not understanding what you really want out of life, it's a recipe for disaster. So I went through my mid-30s and I had a full schedule. I did not perceive stress. We had 3 little kids at home at that time, right? 4. And I just could not get enough sleep. I just felt like crap all the time. The only time I did feel good is when I was working out intensely, because that's where I was creating a lot of positive sort of endorphins. But shortly after that, the workouts, I always had to crash for a while. And I woke up always feeling like, well, I just feel like crap. Coffee to coffee. I would just have venti after venti after venti to just get me through my day. And, started having a few panic attacks. And this isn't all about my adrenal fatigue experience, but to give you a few insights: anxiety, depression, problems with weight gain, food allergies, that all skyrocketed. And thankfully, I had Robyn to be doing quite a bit of research for me, because I had zero capabilities other than to just drag myself through the day. And if you feel like that, you're not alone, and it doesn't happen. And I got to tell you, I was in the ER at some point because I was throwing heart palps, and it didn't even allude to anything. They just assumed that you taking too much creatine. What the F? What the F? Like, how is that? And there's nothing wrong with you. Okay, great. But I had this looming, like, something's up with me. And I didn't have an understanding of what that was. It wasn't until Robyn did a fair amount of studying, and Dr. Brian Walsh has this course about Fat Is Not Your Fault, that kind of give us insights into the sort of the waterfall that can lead to this. We always have a given amount that we can hold in our buckets. When it starts overflowing, that's when we get into problems. And learning to empty that bucket yourself, or raise the size of your bucket, make a bigger bucket. So
to put in perspective too, so it's 2021. This was 2010 when this happened. And at the time, really, like, no doctor, at least none of the doctors we went to said that's anything wrong. It's all in your head. It's normal to be tired. Anxiety's normal. Depression's normal. Here's a med for it. I mean, today, that is so the norm that I think it's even more accepted, that it's just normal for you to go through your life with anxiety, depression, trouble losing weight, trouble sleeping, the feeling of like you can't let down, like fight or flight mode all the time, wired and tired. I think way more people exist in it, and it's been like looked upon like that it's okay. At the time, I think people who are older than us kind of look down and go, oh, that's what we'd call a midlife crisis.
Yeah, I was 35.
or you have andropause. He was 35.
Oh yeah, andropause. That was a good one. That was a really good one. But here's the hard part with any and all of that. What's the answer? Pharmaceuticals.
And the fact is that we weren't going to go that route. And so I'd spent so many hours researching, and yet, like you said, I came across someone. It took a long time for me to stumble upon this, but Dr. Brian Walsh, and it was like this program, I think it was like $300 to buy his videos. And here I am watching these videos, learning everything about the endocrine system. And then we topped it off with like some herb supplements and just lifestyle changes, totally
revamped.
Totally woo-woo stuff. Who does healing? I mean, the funny thing is, if you guys stick with our podcast, we're setting this up to like, we will eventually get into like where healing's going, like even beyond the fact that it has to do with like what you eat and like your mindset and your stress levels. Like there's so much in consciousness that we can do to heal ourselves. It's incredible, but let's not jump too many steps at first.
Yeah, that can be a little bit overwhelming, but I can tell you again, if you didn't already know that, my background over the last 30 years has been in the health and fitness industry. And real early on, and even now, I realized the power that I have by my presence on the people that I work with. Did you get that part? The power of my presence and what it has on the people that I work with. And so I'm not necessarily standing up here as a healer, but I knew that my presence is always lifts people up, right? And so if you can imagine, and again, if you think this is hocus pocus, like go stress yourself out. You've been in that situation. You should know that has a negative impact on your health. If you don't validate that, you should probably go watch something else. Okay. And ultimately, I think I come from that. I started off physical therapy. I know how to rehab people, but at some point I had to ask myself. I had one gentleman that came in, and I was giving him physical therapy for almost every major every physical therapy for almost every major joint. And I'm like, hey man, I'm treating every joint. We need to think about what's inflaming you, and not even from a dietary standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint. And when I was able to jump into that, it opened my eyes up, and particularly through my own experience, having an understanding of that. So, we're kind of getting around to this, but ultimately that fight or flight situation that they're in, where we use that term very, very often, right? We use it a tons, and Robyn alluded to it a little bit in the previous podcast, but it is so powerful. It's that experience that you know, an animal, you see it at the water's edge and it knows it's taking a huge risk, because everything in it's saying, this alligator, this crocodile is going to come up and bite me, but I am so thirsty, I have to take this drink and I have to do it. And it knows that it's taking that risk. On some level, 100% of the people that I work with are living in that mode. And so when they come in and see me, the first thing I do is take them out of that before I put them through exercise. Now, what does that mean? It could be a small dialogue until I realize that their shoulders drop, or maybe I start to notice diaphragmatic breathing, or I frankly lay them down. I know quite a few on Monday. Mondays are really hard for humans. Yeah. You can even narrow it down. You know, heart attacks happen between 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning on Monday. What are people doing at 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning? They're going back to work, but most of them don't want to be there. And so that fight or flight just comes cascading down. And so you can see this fight or flight through breathing patterns, and even the dialogue that people are bringing, you know, the way they're talking, repeating themselves about certain stresses in their lives. You can tell they're in that mode. And so as a trainer and coach, I'm like, okay, well, I can't take exercise is another stress on the human body. And so I had to relearn to go, okay, well, I can reshift what exercise is by making things more playful, taking less pressure off, like, come on, do it, push yourself. So it's like, hey, let's have a little fun, let's listen to great music. Or I can help them by learning meditative practices, calming them down before breath work. And a vast majority of clients that I'm working with now, I focus on, I chunk it into thirds. Come in, decompress through MFR, deep breathing, talk about whatever's going on in their life, give them a middle section, which includes some exercise. And then we sit and meditate, because I know if I don't do it with them, it's not going to happen.
And this is huge, because before we moved up to Polson, this was not your protocol for training people, right?
It was not. It was, still very, very traditional in a lot of ways, because I felt like my job was to create hard workouts. It always has been hard enough that they get results. I think anyone that's in the fitness industry knows that it's real easy to make things so hard that people will feel unsuccessful.
It's almost like you're creating another addiction, because we're addicted to the stress,
sure,
but we're almost addicted to the stress that's caused in our workouts.
You're absolutely right.
And so before we moved up to Polson, part of what was hard for you is, like, you loved, actually, let me back up really fast. When I met Victor, I didn't really work out. I was pretty young. I played soccer. I taught gymnastics, but I didn't work out. And then I met him, and he was a meathead. He was in Gold's Gym every night. So I was in Gold's Gym every night with him.
It was fun.
And after a couple months, well, let's see, we started dating. I was still a senior in high school. But when we started dating and I went to college with him, I'm like, you're a business major, but all you do is spend your time in the gym. So I walked him over to the kines department. I'm like, he needs to switch majors, because he should not be a business major. He was falling asleep. Now, granted, the stress on our marriage, he should have been a business major maybe, because
marketing,
it would have helped.
To be specific, not necessarily business.
But let's be...
Michal, you need to go business administration or international business.
And it's really good that he switched to kines, but it also, side note, college marketing probably wouldn't have been the answer anyways. You can learn everything you want to learn in college outside of college.
Free.
So he switched majors. We're in the gym.
Late fees.
And you guys know what movie that is? And so we went to, we were going to Gold's Gym all the time. And see, you told me, I forgot my train of thought.
That's what happens when we do these together. It's supposed to make it entertaining.
I was trying to think.
Your point was, we worked out together, and I think you were getting to the point where you're like, wait,
it was just everything was about the workout. And then there got to be a point where later in your career, like, you loved working out. So you became a kines major, and you started out as a trainer, which was really great in, like, let's get everyone stronger. And unfortunately, a lot has happened over the last 25 years in just not even the fitness industry, just the world in general, that, Yeah, 25 years ago, the average person needed hard workouts. Now life is just so stressful that most people can't even handle it. And so around the same time, like 2012, I definitely shifted more into yoga and into surfing, and I didn't work out with him very much anymore. And in that time, I kind of was like, you work out too much. You work out too much. Why do you always just want to work out? But there's some part of him that was like, some part of it, it's really good for his personality type. It's really good. But part of it was also a compensation.
Absolutely. It's real easy to not understand that someone that might have felt weak their entire life, or particularly as a kid, was trying to compensate by becoming as strong as possible to protect themselves from whatever that was, right? And so that alludes to something slightly deeper, bigger, but still incredibly valid to have an understanding of.
Well, I was thinking like we moved, so it was a really big stress on our relationship while we are traveling. We've already covered there was a stress that just for his personality type, just being in new situations. But it was also stress on his body not to work out, because even though when we were in San Diego and maybe he was slightly addicted to the workouts, at least it also fulfilled some form of like venting and blowing off steam and just losing yourself in something. Well, when we went to travel, like 6 months to Europe, he only went into a gym twice, and it was just really hard for you to walk into new situations and just be.
Yeah, I mean, we had a camper van for a vast majority down, driving into downtown cities, and in the end, I was like, what the heck was I thinking that was even necessary? Was crazy. But again,
but you probably should have at the time, right?
At the time, looking back, I should have forced it a little bit. And I still, for most time, that's again, personality links. I never do anything for myself. I tend to self-sacrifice until the point where I just run out of steam and energy. And so those are sort of, that alludes to kind of self-wiring issues. And so if you're going through some of this, you have to be able to, and this is where personality typing and Enneagram are sort of a great tool to step outside your body. Now, there are issues with testing for this, and we talk about this all the time. And as a matter of fact, like it's kind of a running joke how little I knew about this stuff. They were so early to the game, again, because I was in my own fight or flight with my business and retaining clients and trying to grow a client that I wouldn't acquire. They would talk about it. Becky, tell me what that one is again. Tell me that. So it's a running joke that how little I knew about this for a very long time. But then when I started to step into it, like, wait, this is going to help me. And it helps me understand my clients so that I can provide that little bit of extra attention or programming.
Well, it's like everybody kind of has their core thing to realize that they need. So for example, like I was saying with Victor and working out, he absolutely needs some element of that. The worst thing to do, the two worst things. The worst thing is for him to train hard every day in the gym. The second worst thing is for him to never train. Finding that balance is really important. Someone like my personality type doesn't necessarily need the weight room. The worst thing for me is not to be out adventuring in nature, and the second worst thing is for me to be doing it so much that I'm overdoing it, and the intensity causes me to burn out in other ways. So yeah. It's really important to know your personality type. The irony I thought you were going to say is that nobody can test themselves.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to get to, but I think it gets sidetracked when I'm sitting next to my girl. So, sorry, not my wife. Yeah, personality typing becomes really, really hard, especially when you're sitting, especially because you have depending on when you are in a growth phase or not so growth phase, you'll test a little bit differently.
Yeah, for sure.
And so we've done a little bit. That is incredibly important for me to test people, but then follow our instincts and go, yeah, I think she's in growth or he's in growth, or, they're in not so healthy growth. And that's why they test this way, and follow our intuition a little bit. And I think 9 times out of 10, we're pretty spot on at identifying that. But it still can be a valuable tool for you to understand what you need so that you can sort of break yourself out of the matrix.
So going back to the physical body, what I was leading up to is that when we moved up here to Polson, after so many years of him overtraining in our business, and then we went to travel the world a lot and he'd undertrain. And so it was like this, in some ways, to tying it back to like how we become addicted to stress. It was almost like a stress addiction. And, the compassionate wife that I'm trying to be was always like, you need to do more yoga with me. You need to do. So when we moved into Polson, remember what happened at the time? You weren't doing yoga that often. And within 2 weeks, we were doing yoga every day when we first moved in here. We didn't put a couch in our living room. We have this beautiful, huge space in our living room to do yoga, looks over in the mountains. Remember within 2 weeks, all of a sudden your hip pain went away.
Yeah, that was incredibly, and again, when we talk about yoga, if you have a yoga practice, you probably already know this, but it's less about stretching than you think. Again, yoga is not as much about stretching for me as much more of a checking in with the body sort of mindfulness. And remember, the mind and body are connected, and so we hold a lot of emotion in our muscles to the point that, when people have pain after I'm doing my diagnosis, I'm like, certainly if someone goes out and runs after not running for decades and they have shin pain, I'm like, oh yeah, gave yourself shin splints because you haven't trained. But to the point that everyone is potentially healthy and all of a sudden they start manifesting some low back discomfort or in a lot of women shoulder discomfort, I know that stress is linked to that. And so I assumed, that being my physical therapist kind of running through me, I'm like, oh, it's always linked a little bit. It's all the heavy lifting I do. And I get 2 weeks into this journey and I'm going, God darn it. Like, I can't believe it's all how I'm holding myself. And it was hugely insightful to me, not only to have that practice, but also to have that connection, because then I started to jump up even farther and go, oh, wow, I had this. What is going on with the people I work with? And how can I serve them better? And how can I, oh my gosh, where can I scream this at the top of my lungs? And some part of me is resistant to still do that because of fear of judgment, but that's a whole nother side thing. But it needs to happen so that people realize that they can heal themselves through a wide variety of things. Does that mean you have to sit and do yoga for hours on end? No, or meditate hours on end? No, but if you start to bring a little bit of mindfulness into even sitting in quiet and silence, it can help you to understand how you're carrying your body and some of the stresses that you might have and how they're impacting you negatively. And the quicker you understand that connection, the quicker you understand long-term health.
Yeah, and that's why we are trying to include more of this on, Defy the Norm podcast. Defy the Norm is all about questioning everything, even your own self, even your shoulder pain. Hey, shoulder, why are you hurting me? Shoulder, like, I did all the rehab for you. You just keep sending me these sharp pains at my neck.
Right here for me. So that's about,
yeah. And it's like when you stop and question, why? What is my subconscious trying to tell me? Because remember, your subconscious is 95% of your thoughts are subconscious.
Sub means below. It's happening on a level that you don't even realize. But if you bring some awareness to that, then you can be like, oh, yeah.
Absolutely. So,
one of the big things that going into that, that forced me to question this with some of the people I work with is that the way that people answer. As a trainer in general, when people come in, hey, how are you doing? Great, I'm good. And I started to realize and evaluate that term because it was being so used by a lot of people. And it takes a little while, first off, to get to know someone to the point where they do let themselves really be vulnerable. Now, that can be a little bit of a challenge as a trainer because it could be just a bitch session. We're like bartenders or like shrinks in a lot of ways. And that can be an opportunity for them to vent. But at the same time, we live in a society where that is kind of the norm, to always say we're good.
I remember even writing about it in my book, The Road Less Traveled, that when we went to Europe, I can't remember what spots I wrote about it, but that if somebody says, how are you? They expect you to actually say how you are, not I'm good. In the US, you just say, how are you? It's like a formality. You're on autopilot, subconscious training. How are you? I'm good. But we've traveled to places where you say,
if you say, how are you? That's a 45-minute conversation.
Well, I'm doing good, but my knee's been bothering me. And, my husband, he keeps hanging out at that bar every night. And then, he went and you just open it up and we have this because we have a very open dialogue in our family and we have been, on this path of but it's hard to get other people to talk like that. It's hard to get them to open up. How are you? What do you really, how are you should be more of a, what are you thinking about? instead of like, how are you? We're all just trying our best. It's hard no matter what, but it should be more like, hey, what are you thinking about? Like, what are you really thinking about? What's on your mind?
Yeah, so I think the take home with that little one is like, think about that knee jerk. If someone asks you something and you're saying I'm good, but you're really not good, because more often than not, people are not, especially after further inspection. And I can read between the lines. I go, okay, well, let me ask, well, how's your weekend? How's this? How's your eating? And then I start stretching them or start warming them up. And you start squeezing on those muscles, and as most people know, you're holding emotion in those muscles. And I've had people countless times sort of break down or then sort of be ready to kind of open up and start sharing that. And all of a sudden, like, how do you feel now? Much better. Yeah. I'm like, okay, now we're ready to move. And so having an understanding of that, I think, is important, especially if you're trying to get out of that fight or flight response. So if you have those knee-jerk reactions that you're telling people, first off, you're not letting people in. Second, you're also keeping yourself in this sort of grind mentality. And look, I come from a long list of grinders. Like, we grind like no other. And that's okay, but oftentimes I talked to quite a few people while I was visiting in San Diego, and their knee-jerk reaction is to always, hey, how are you? And, oh, good, man, it's so busy, so busy. And you can kind of see it all over them.
We take pride in being
You take pride in being that way. And some part of that shows success, like, wow, that's great, I'm glad you're busy. But at the same time, if they're not, and they're doing that, they're putting themselves in that fight or flight response chronically. And that can lead to dis-ease.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you have to decide if health is truly important to you. Is it like, unfortunately, you can have health and wealth, but it's hard. It takes a lot of work. And I think for a lot of people, nobody's stepping in and saying like, hey, you know what? Like, it's okay. You don't have to work so hard to prove yourself. You don't have to be, I tell Victor all the time, like, do we really need to make another 1,000 this month? Like, we could enjoy it a little bit. I mean, I'm not saying to like zero out our account this month necessarily, but I'm saying like, hey, maybe we could spend more time together and like work a little less, or maybe yes.
Yeah, it's, from personal experience, I could tell you that, and especially my journey, which I'm not, I always tell Robyn, like, before we start recording, like, man, don't throw me under the bus. This shouldn't be a session where it's all about, all right, Victor sucks, let's talk about that. But I think, if I can share that and help a few people out with my journey, then it's certainly worth it. And ultimately, given the way I deliver information, sometimes a lot of people, it resonates with people. And so that's definitely worth doing. We
are an amazing duo because, like, I have the ideas, but he has the delivery service because no one wants to hear it from me.
That's not true.
The reason it seems like he gets thrown under the bus, or the reason why it's harder for him or he struggles, is, like he said, he comes from a line of grinders. And for a lot of people, the same thing that goes hand in hand with your response is like, I'm good, I'm busy. It's programming. We are programmed to always be in fear of not having enough, or that we can always prove ourselves more. And I remember from very early on in our marriage, because we were self-employed and we didn't know when money was going to come in. And we were absolutely trying to live a lifestyle of keeping up with the Joneses, have new cars, have a big fancy house. I was definitely like, oh my gosh, if you can take more money, take more money. And initially, very early on. And then, and Victor grew up like his parents. In fact, he went back to San Diego a couple weeks ago because we needed to make a little bit of more money. Well, and it was time to.
It's also, it was time to go back. And I have a lot of people that have supported my digital. So everyone I work with now works with me digitally.
It was out of desire, not necessity. It was just more you wanted to. But he just goes back a couple weeks, and his dad's like, what do you mean you're not moving back? But like, you can make so much money. And like, it's not about the money always.
And can't you make more money here? I'm like, yes, but they took my.
Well, it's not even that. It's like we'll enjoy our life. Again.
Yeah, I do. The pace of life, alone. I remember walking outside and looking. I told you this, in the evenings looking up at the stars. Well, you can't really see many stars on the coast in a big city. So it was a little bit hard for me to go look up. I'm like, I don't see those stars. I don't have that space.
In our house in Polson, I joke with him because when he wakes up in the to go to the bathroom at night, he always walks by our sliding glass door to like stare at the windows, because Victor doesn't love like adventure and camping. He does not like to the same extent I do,
Thank you.
but he loves looking at it. Like especially
I like being in nature a lot. Like
he just doesn't like to move it. Like he doesn't want to go climb or hike.
It's not as necessary for me as it is for Robyn.
And that's a type 2 versus type 8 thing. And it helps because we know that about each other. And we've been together for so long that we get to joke about it. But I know that I'm like, my big compromise. I'm like, yeah, let's just go camping more often. You can sit and like stare at the stars and I can go rock climb. And then we can do both together every other day. I don't know. So anyways, it was like early, it's a programming thing. It was absolutely a programming that you never turn down. If you can make another $75, you absolutely should never turn it down.
You know, one of the problems, let me interject here. One of the problems with that is I went back for 2 weeks. And it's really not, obviously it's always nice, complimentary. Like I had a full schedule. Everyone wanted to come in as often I was there in person and get kind of updated and get the focus. People feed off that energy. And that way when I do leave, they can. But there were some days I was working 10 to 12 hour days. And I get on the plane and I'm like, oh man, I got a cold. I could feel it coming on, and I was a mess the first 48 hours.
Yeah.
And you could still hear it in my voice. I'm still fighting that. And that's because of that nature. Like, okay, yes, do more. Yeah, okay, take it, you know. And ultimately, if there is an intention with that, and Robyn can allude to this, and we're getting a little sidetracked from sort of the adrenal and living outside the matrix issue, but, you know, if I gave you a list of the things that really matter to me, very few of them are connected to money.
Yeah.
Very few.
But yet
I do everything to get that. And so I have to
even with somebody
myself.
married to you that's like, hey, it doesn't matter. Like we still need to like have intention, but it doesn't have to be to that making money is a central focus that we miss out on the things that really matter. And it's challenging to find that space between the two. And it's funny because even our kids, you know, I kind of like that with homeschooling, I've been able to, you know, raise entrepreneurs that are very driven and they want to live purposeful lives, but they even become like overachievers, overworking.
You got to tell them to chill.
I tell them, I'm like, because we go on these road trips, we go climbing and they work less and it's good for them. And then they're like, okay, I got to come back and I got to, you know, create another funnel or write another blog, or I got to get, you know, all my posts up on YouTube and up on Instagram and And I'm like, hey, you guys, maybe just chill for a day. Like just enjoy the transition. But at the same time, it's good to have intention. So my thing is always like, you should absolutely have it outlined, like your big term win. What do you really want in life? What's the most, what matters the most? Then take it a step. What are things that you can measure that with? Like, so if Victor is like, oh my gosh, my most important thing is to like feel in love with you, Robyn, then I have to go, okay, well, like, how do you know you've succeeded in that? Well, like, you're not yelling at me, or, you know, you're smiling and laughing with me, or things like that. And go, okay, well, what do we need to schedule into the day to make that happen? So you start with your biggest goal. That's a feeling you're trying to create. And then go, well, how's that
measured?
See that. And then what can I schedule it into my day to make sure that happens? And, you know, sometimes we just don't even, when we put that on paper, we realize like, oh, wow, we're putting the wrong tasks on our to-do list. No wonder we're living in survival mode.
Yeah. I had a client this week that said, thank you, sent me a text that said, thank you for taking the blinders off. And that was a big moment because he realized, now he doesn't have all the answers yet, but at least he realizes that, oh man, I was putting myself in this, and I had become someone that wasn't aligned. And certainly when he was telling me stories about his travels, for example, I'm like, wait, there's a time when you were this way. Let's see if we can get you to that. And obviously that starts with exercises and eating right, and that can impact how you think and feel. And so once you get people to that point,
Yeah, it's really hard to make these mindset shifts or to look at your life this way if you're just putting in toxins in your body.
Yeah,
If
you can't go sit and eat a bag
your
of
brain
Cheetos.
literally, like your gut is your second brain, so it's really hard to process these things if you're
Gut is off.
inflamed.
Yeah, so it's certainly health and wellness. Good whole foods are a critical component. Taking care of your health. And
It's
your
funny that he said
gut.
blinders, because I was just thinking how, like, in my book, I always write like you need like my success has been because I wear blinders. So I think it's
A little
having
different, yeah.
intentional blinders. I think we tend to wear blinders sometimes towards where our Enneagram leads us, whether it's like, are we looking for perfectionist blinders? Are we looking for
Yeah.
achievement blinders?
Well, I guess more what he was alluding to is that it's sort of the Matrix analogy, being awakened to the fact that when he's inputted into this city life and in this grind mentality, when he's in it, he did not realize how different he had become until I coaxed him to feel better and then start doing the mental exercises and start stepping back, like, what do you really want? And then he realizes, like, oh man, I had become someone that was inauthentic to his soul.
Yeah.
And so blinders would probably be, because that tends to focus on, I think blindfold would be better, taking off the blindfold. But I knew where he was coming from. And now it'll be interesting to see him in the next 6 months, that he's got some great plans. So to step outside the Matrix, give him a step, man. Give him something. Just talk about experiences here. Like, come on, let's bring it home.
Don't put me on the spot or anything. You were just going so long. I'm like, man, I was just still in awe. I'm like, wow, you had a lot to say.
I have more to say if you want.
I guess we'll have to show up tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Personally, I think it still comes down to what you want.
What you want. Wiki. Like that.
It still comes down to, like, what are you going to define as your happiness? And there's a good chance that happiness is tied to your Enneagram, and there's a good chance that you're going to take the Enneagram test and test wrong.
I.e. core values. So the big thing with Enneagram is that you can identify where your core desires are, and I think that's when you test, you should look at that.
You have to have somebody test with you, and then you could actually, on Making Mindfulness Fun YouTube, the girls and I go through all 9 of them. You almost need to just watch all 9. I also have a link to our personality type course in the description, because it really does go through a lot of details. But okay, so let's say I'm an 8. My core desire is experience, intensity, challenge. So while yes, living, having babies, 5 of them in about a decade, was absolutely challenged.
It was really hard for me too. Just kidding.
It was hard for you. But it was, if I told myself that, if I like pretended that I was a type 2 and like, oh my gosh, I just care, like I'm a mom, I just give to my kids so much, and I'm just about like helping them. Of course, being a mom requires helping them.
Sure.
But that is not my core desire. At the time, before 2010, I could have easily told myself that, because I didn't know any better. I was literally like, my days existed of waking up, making them breakfast, doing school.
It's almost like you are in the Matrix then, right?
Oh, I was definitely in the Matrix. And then it's not until I until I like noticed a desire. I noticed like, this doesn't feel right. Jealousy is a great one. At least it was for me, because I'd be like, social media wasn't big then, but I'd see like travel magazines, or I'd be drawn to books of people who like I remember one was somebody walking the Camino and their experience. I'm like, ooh, this sounds interesting. And another person was like left the rat race to go like start a farm. And I was very drawn to those type of things. So you have insight and like, wow, this is what I'm kind of curious about this. And then like, I was the type of personality that takes that next step. So you have to have a little insight into like, where's that curiosity? What's sparking some interest? And like, hey, take a step in there, at least dip your toe in the water.
So check it out. Let me give you a practical application, because I've asked people this. I have one gentleman I've worked with for almost 20 years, and when I ask him, what's his goal, or like what he can't even tell me what he likes. He's like, I just don't know who I am. Just don't know who you are. And he's approaching his late 50s, because You have so much time that you're inputted into this, and you're just off and running, right? And so I'm like, all right, let's start simple. Let's like, well, how do you like your coffee? How do you like this? And so start small and build up to the point. Because Robyn will always say, "What's the
Are
goal?"
you talking about you?
Oh yeah, that was me.
I'm like, wait, I'm trying to think. I'm like, 20 years of a client.
No,
But
I'm not talking
you
about
weren't
me,
talking
but I
about
do
you?
have that problem all the time. But I know how I want my coffee, and I know how I want my eggs, and I know how I want to actually like to spend my day with my family.
So then the next step of that, if for some reason that works for you, or if it doesn't work for you even, and you actually can identify, once I get to the point, I'm like, I know I'm a type 8 and I actually do need to grow as more of like a type 2. That's my growth number. And so I can what works for me and what I notice works for a lot of people, if you just attach to the qualities of what your growth is. So for Victor, I always tell him like, hey,
my growth is a 4,
which is the individual.
Individualist. And so I try to show you guys my sort of quirkiness today, which is goofy, different. And if I can get Robyn laughing on any occasion, I'm like, dude, that was such a huge win. So if you like this and you like me being here, please leave us a review for this. Leave some questions if you guys have any questions.
Yeah, we gotta keep Victor coming back for more.
I'd love to be back here more. Sometimes, life certainly gets in the way, and this is life is not this perfect, what do you always say, rainbows and...
I don't know, do I say that?
And sunshine. There is obviously challenges that face all of us. Sometimes the challenges that we...
That person too that I think you were alluding to, it's funny, it's like, one of our differences, or one of the things that make us maybe defy the norm easier is when we notice there's something that we want. At least I drag Victor to do this. We just go do it. We don't just dip our toe in the water. We do it without, like, even if it's not asking permission. Like I know somebody who they want. Oh, I know another person you work with is different, that like rents an airplane to go to concerts and see concerts. Sure. And I think of like, that is so awesome. That is so the perfect thing for that person to rent a plane, because he's a pilot, so, and go fly to different concerts, because
he's such a music lover,
and he loves music. And
there's no concerts right now, so it's
hard. But I thought, like, people don't do that, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's so much money. I don't know. There's just so many things you can do that are outside the box that seem like I'm not allowed to do that. And I know there's a lot of things that we've done in our travels that most people are like, what? Like, you're not allowed to do that. No, society doesn't give you permission to just like fly to Europe for 6 months and like live out of a backpack. And yes, while that was really hard for Victor, I think he's super grateful for the experience.
Super grateful. I got to see some places I would never seen,
and you just do it. I don't know. For me, I'm like, I really don't wait for permission. That's definitely a type 8 thing. But you can. There's some element that you can be like, you know what? I'm just gonna go do it, right?
Yeah,
it's hard for you. Like,
look, it sounds so cliche to say life's so short, one life to live, but very, very few people actually live their life with intention, because we've been plugged into a system, much like Morpheus holds up that battery. It's in the Matrix, and if you're one of the few people that haven't seen it, there's a scene where he's just describing to Keanu Reeves, where he's like, it's to take a human and make him nothing more than a battery, right? The alien life form has plugged all the humans in to create them a battery. Well, we're really in a world where
we're not far
from that. I mean, being a cog in a system is certainly what they want. I mean, think about it. Even in school, the bell rings, stand up. Bell rings, sit down. Stand up, line up. I mean, there is some training going on for that institutionalization, and it can kind of kill and stifle creative energy. Now, some of that is built off of sort of the agriculture, and you could say like, oh, well, that's just a system they developed. But at the same time, you have to have the ability to step outside that, and then we have the ability that we had a chance to go, no, that doesn't work for us and our kids and our family.
Maybe tomorrow we could share a story about how we do that with our kids, because remember, for so long it used to be like you'd always want Jiraiya to like just listen, follow directions, just listen. And there's this element of respect that I totally want our kids to like listen to us, but not so much that they are developing that cog mentality of like,
just do as you're told, don't question. And let's face it, we live in a time where if you want to give this is my strong opinion, and I've been working with children for over 30 years, not only my own, but others. If you want to give your kids an advantage, you let them develop that uniqueness, that weirdness now, not next week, now. Let that come out, because without that creativity, how are they going to stand out, that diamond in the rough? They're all diamonds in the rough. That's what I always used to tell parents. Like, look, they're all extremely special. I never met a bad kid. You know, I've had kids there were discipline problems in my class, but I was like, man, that kid's going to do well. I could see their path to success.
I'm laughing because he's like a magnet for so many people come in, and like, my kid has Asperger's, my kid has not that one. What do they have?
That's a big one.
Yeah.
He's on the spectrum, they say.
On the spectrum.
And I'll be like, okay.
Victor can take any kid and get them to like listen, but because he can nurture their creativity or nurture their individuality, but he gets it's amazing.
Yeah, not as much anymore. Obviously, I do all my gymnastics training via FaceTime and Zoom now, so it's a little bit different. But when I used to teach group classes, it was a standard thing. Like, if people, particularly parents, thought, my kid is having trouble with coordination, let me take him to gymnastics. and some of that is good, but at the same time, you're like, oh man, this one kid stands out as an outlier and can't do cartwheels because maybe his growth rate, he's really lanky. His coordination hasn't come online, and that's very, very normal. They all end up evening out. But in a class of 12, if that one boy or girl is having trouble, you're like, ooh, how do I make them feel successful? Or if they have a little bit of attention issues, like, you end up putting them in their own. I do a lot of station work because I want them to get the ideas, like, they're getting so many reps that they end up being fatigued before they don't want to listen. And when I say sit down, they're like, sure, I'll sit down. And then where you don't give, you have that line of discipline. But again, that's aside. But we can go into that tomorrow a little bit. And I think the secrets to success for physicality in kids and athleticism is, I certainly have opinions on that, and what I've seen in kids and what I've seen in general fitness for children over the last 3 decades. It can be a little bit of a dangerous spot, and having so many kids at such a broad age, and I think we've done a pretty amazing job of nurturing their sort of physical and mental, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But that's homeschooling and raising kids, and at this point, we certainly have our opinions about how to do that, and if it helps you, we'll be happy to share that.
Perfect. All right.
That's a wrap.
I think we covered a lot.
Stick a fork in you.
Thanks, you guys.